Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I've got a new background here. I'm just in my kitchen. There's nothing particularly special about it. But anyway, I'm here to talk about the news and what's going on today and in general. I mean, something I have been speaking about for many, many years, as I know many of you have as well, is this relationships and sex education that the Tory government, the fake Conservative government, has put into place in schools in England. And they did that back in 2017 with the Children and Social Care Act, which had an amendment that Labour put in, the government backed it, and then that became law that all schools had to do this, secondary schools anyway, and primary schools all had to start teaching something called relationships education. And initially they put out guidance that said that schools all have to teach LGBT issues. Obviously up in a secondary schools, that would be sex and relationships education, but in primary schools, just relationships. But they could teach about LGBT sex as well, whatever that means. Most parents are horrified at this, but most parents don't actually know what's going on because there's a whole range of new lesson materials that have gone into schools which are absolutely degenerate and deplorable. I mean, you hear reports about things that are, on the fringe, on the way into understanding what's going on. There's books like My Princess Boy that teaches little boys in primary schools that they can be girls and so on. But, you get things that are far, far more explicit than that, going down even to 4 or 5-year-olds. But what the government has said today in a speech by the education minister is that they're going to issue some new guidance to schools, to primary schools, saying that children under the age of 9 should not learn about sex education. They shouldn't have to do sex education. And they're also saying that they shouldn't have to learn about gender ideology. But if they do, they need to learn that it's contested and some people don't agree with gender ideology. The thing is, this isn't actually going to make any real change whatsoever, because as it stands, the legislation in the Children and Social Care Act says that only secondary schools have to teach relationships and sex education. Primary schools don't have to teach it anyway. Most of them don't explicitly, but because they're teaching relationships education, which has to be LGBT inclusive, they start going into issues about relationships and sex education, because kids ask questions. You can't start talking about all different kinds of families are equal, which is one of the tropes of this new subject. They don't promote traditional family values, the mother and the father bringing up their own children, which, according to every study that's ever been done on family and child bringing up children, is shown to be the best model of family for every kind of outcome for children, both in terms of employment, in relationships, in education, and so on. But they say that, a family with 2 men and a child is equal to a family with a mother and a father and a child, or 2 women and some children, or 3 men, 2 women, a dog, a horse, and somebody else's children, and a pineapple is equal to a traditional family, which of course is complete abject nonsense. But this is the kind of thing that they're teaching children in schools under the basis of relationships education. But once you start talking about different kind of families, then kids start asking questions about that, which leads on to other things. But of course, that's just the beginning of it. The ideology behind this is queer theory, gender theory, children's sexual rights, children are sexual from birth, reproductive rights, all kinds of things that they teach children. So they start to teach about self-stimulation from the age of 4 or 5, which is absolutely paedophilic. But this comes from the World Health Organization's guidance sheet and the UN program of comprehensive sexuality education. That's what it's called, which they want to introduce into schools in every country around the world. The fake Conservatives have done it in England, Labour have done it in Wales, the SNP have done it in Scotland, and in Northern Ireland it's been imposed from Westminster because for a number of years the Stormont Assembly was completely dysfunctional and wasn't meeting. Anyway, now we got an election coming up, so you've got to beware of all the tricks of all the parties. And of course the fake Conservatives are trying to sound more conservative than they usually do. They've spent the last 14 years pushing the LGBT agenda on everybody, including in schools, including in businesses with the diversity, equality and inclusion officers and so on. They haven't done anything about it. But there's an election in a few months' time, so now they're pretending to sound as though they are conservative and they're going to protect children from sexualization, when actually they have been facilitating this for the last 14 years. So don't be fooled by them. Any statement now about trying to be conservative and protecting children from the worst excesses of sex education that they have introduced into primary schools, whether it's overtly or covertly or inadvertently or purposefully, it's happening. They haven't stopped it. Now they're pretending that they're going to do something about clearing up the mess that they've made. But you can be sure that if they get back into power, the whole agenda will just continue, and they don't really care about what children learn in schools as long as it's degenerate and culturally Marxist, which is what is happening with the Uniparty, because the fake Conservatives and Labour are no different really under the surface. They're all one globalist blob together. So don't be fooled by this announcement. It sounds good, but it isn't actually going to do much difference, isn't going to make much difference at all. And also because it's guidance, and guidance is not legislation, and you can issue guidance to anybody and they can turn around and say, well, thank you very much, I'm just going to ignore it because the legislation doesn't mention anything that you've written here, and according to the legislation I can teach relationships and sex education to primary school kids, and I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And that is what will happen with all of the LGBT activists who have embedded themselves in schools, including in primary schools, because you know that when Pride Month comes around, or Pride History Month, or Gay History Month, or LGBT Diversity Month, which seems to be a month every month of the year these days, they're going to have all rainbow flags on the wall and drag queens and all kinds of other things there to indoctrinate and normalise LGBT agenda and lifestyles and sexualised children in schools. They're still there. They need to be purged from our education system. And a few words from the fake Conservative education minister before an election isn't going to do that, because they're not doing anything about the legislation which is in place. So these clauses in the Children and Social Care Act need to be repealed and struck out. We need to get rid of these subjects in totality, and we also need to change or repeal the Equality Act to get rid of this whole concept of diversity and institutions that are part of the state or funded by the state, which include educational institutions these days, are required to foster good relationships with groups with protected characteristics. And if they don't do that, if they're not seen as being affirmative to different sexual orientations, different people with gender reassignment, etc., then they are in breach of the Equality Act and the public sector equality duty. The law should not be like this. The law should just say, you can do whatever you like, but that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Don't do that. This is a law that says you must do this, you must say that, you must affirm this, you must be positive to this group of people. Otherwise, you can find yourself in trouble. You may even find yourself out of a job if you refuse to go along with a school's transgender code of conduct or something like that, which has happened to a lot of people over the last decade or so. So my point is here, this sounds good. Sounds like a great announcement, but don't be fooled by red meat, fake red meat from the fake Conservative Party. in an election period, which they will turn back on immediately if they get back in office again, or if the other side of the Uniparty gets in office. Please, 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 don't vote for the Uniparty. Come and join me in the Heritage Party, because we have the strong policies to affirm traditional family values and biological sex. There are two sexes, male and female, determined by anatomy at birth and your chromosomes. There are not 79 genders. There is no such thing as gender which is different to biological sex. That's just something that's been made up by kooky academics, first of all in the Frankfurt School and then in universities in the United States, which has gone into universities in the UK and spread into schools and so on. It's all a load of absolute nonsense. And a family with a mother and a father who are married to each other, who have their own children and stay together to bring up their own children, is the best model of family for bringing up children that there is. Now, that's not to disparage anybody who isn't fortunate enough to have a family like that. Things go wrong. I didn't have that kind of family myself. I was brought up with my mother, a single mother. She did absolutely the best she could for me, of course. And there are many people who are not in that situation, who are not fortunate enough to have a traditional family with a mother and a father and children. You know, it's not your fault. But that is the best model of family that you can possibly have, with the best possible outcomes for children. And if we don't say that, we're lying, because it's true and there's nothing you can do about it. That's just the way it is. So it's best that we affirm that and try to encourage people to get into that model of family when they're young, if they can, and stay in that model of family if they can, for their own sakes and for the sakes of their children. And I think 90% of people who are teachers in secondary schools and primary schools would be frothing at the mouth if they heard me say that. But there you go. Truth hurts, eh? And you should be teaching it. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this. This is just what needs to be said about this, but we need to get rid of these subjects in order to protect our children. So please come and join me in the Heritage Party, heritageparty.org, if you would like to re-establish traditional family values and biological sex, not gender, in our schools, and protect children from all this dreadful sexualization which is going on by activists who shouldn't be in a school. They should be in a jail.